people coming in as we start. But over to you, Susie.
Sure, thanks, Jenny. Hi, everyone. So I'm Susie. I'm Sustainability Implementation Manager at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm going to be chairing today. And I'll hand over for some intros to our speakers in a minute, but I'll just do some quick housekeeping and a quick run through of the agenda before that. We do have blocks for questions at the end of both presentations and free Q&A at the end. But if you have any questions during the presentations or any other point, please feel free to either put your hand up or put them in the chat, and we'll figure that out as and when. So we'll, in a few minutes, start off with a presentation from by Martin from UKRI on the Spark Hub, and then after that, with some time for Q&A at the end, we'll also have a presentation from Chloe from the University of Exeter on the Trace project. So I will quickly hand over to Martin and then Chloe just to do some quick introductions, and then could we also remind people to keep their mics off? I can just mute you, but it's kinder if I ask you to rather than doing it unilaterally. But yeah, firstly, I'll just quickly hand over to Martin and Chloe to introduce themselves.
Sure, thanks for that, Susie. So I'm Martin Farley. I'm here from UKRI, and I'm the Associate Director of the Environmental Sustainability Program.
Cheers, Martin.
Hi. I'm Chloe Onifrew. I'm from the University of Exeter. I'm Assistant Director for Research Strategy Development and Management, and also leading on sustainability in research.
Thanks, Chloe. Thank you both. So yeah, I think we've got a few less people joining now, but if we just carry on, yeah, I'll hand over to Martin first for the first presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susie. All right, I'm going to share some slides, and apologies for some of you might have seen some of these before, but okay, I'm guessing you can see that now. So thank you everybody for joining and this slot today. Thank you, EAC. So just to, I like to always start with the rationale for how we've approached this and why. We have our own UKRI strategy, which is actually just going to be renewed right now. Was hoping we could have a longer update on this, but it's going for approval internally. So I would just say watch this space in the next month or so, because we really hope to be able to communicate that before long. Everybody's aware of the Concordat. I don't need to go into that, but I did want to give a quick update. I think my colleague Jo Alitz is on the call, and I know that she's working very hard right now on a landscape report for the oversight committee, which has been set up. So that's underway, but it's in draft form right now. Now, I wanted to highlight that these efforts are not unique to us in the UK. In mainland Europe, there has been a lot of work to address this, and there's been the Heidelberg Agreement. If you could just mute if you're, thank you. So there's been the Heidelberg Agreement, and there's been a raft of sustainability policies, and we get the question a lot at UKRI around what we're doing in this space, and we do not have an environmental sustainability policy across the board yet. And it's something that we've been trying to consider and think about, but we do recognize that there's been a lot of good work, and there's different policies that have taken on different shapes and forms across Europe. Everybody's familiar, I'm guessing, with the Welcome and CR UK policies, but the DFG, which is the National Funder of Germany, and VWF in Austria has just released a similar policy to the DFG. And there's also a network of national funders working together in this space at Science Europe. Now, there are a lot of tools out there to address this, which is fantastic, but at UKRI, we fund a really broad set of research activities. And we were considering about how to work with the sector to address some of these areas, including some of the institutional approaches that align with the Concordat. And I'm going to get to that in a bit, but we did think that it would help to try to unify, to simplify access in this space, to have a single approach. There's a lot of people joining. It's a very popular session, I have to say. So one of the things that we found is that there was not sustainability guidance for all of the activities that we fund. Some of them are not open access, and some of them require different amounts of finance to access. There is some consideration for quality control and governance for these things. And we also had a very specific aspect of UKRI, which is that within our grants, we cannot ask open questions that we do not assess. That goes against the principle of adding bureaucracy. So I mentioned that specifically because the DFG and FWF in Austria, that their approach is more about asking questions that they do not assess against research outcomes. So the thought was, at least at this time, we wanted to instead work with the sector to try to address some of these gaps. So what we've done is we've been developing something called Spark Hub, short for the Sustainable Practice and Research Knowledge Hub. And the idea is that it will be open access and free for all folks to use. It has a governance model that is based on being supported by research funders. And I'll mention some of the funders that we've been engaging across the sector. So it's UKRI that have been developing this, but we're doing this through consultation with a ton of other folks. The idea is that it covers all research areas, so it's it can apply to it. I'll show you a list of some of the areas that we're going to cover, and it can cover group activity, but also give some institutional guidance to support you in some pretty specific ways, which I'll mention as well. And it's got a sort of externalized auditing system, which is important about the resource required to do audits. Now, one thing I really want to highlight is this governance model that we've taken with this. And so we've been engaging other funders to provide the support for this to make it then accessible for those funders and the sector. So we've been engaging a group of I think there's around 12 funders now across Europe that are quite interested in this. Some of them include Welcome, that we've been engaging with closely and has been providing really good input on what this should look like. And the idea is that the funders would support this, and then it would be hosted by another organization that's neutral, that's international, that would provide the access for this. And there would be a quality control board to provide the oversight for the content. So I really think that's an important key of this aspect of this, is that the content would reflect the experts around the sector, like yourselves. A lot of benefits, we think, to this approach. It means that there's transparency, open access, a standard approach towards sustainable research activities. There's potentially standard references to calculators, and I'm going to mention one that I think that aligns with what you're going to hear from Chloe about in a second. But yeah, a lot of benefits. I'm not going to read these all out, but we can share out these slides afterwards if you're interested. So, bit of a summary slide, some of the things that'll be available, and I'm going to mention some of the sources of where these are coming from in a second. We've started the website development. It should be live in about a month for a pilot, although we're going to start softly, I think, and move out from there. Website development is always fun, but it's progressing quite well. The idea is that you can come into this and you can see different activities that you're doing. You can, it's sort of a flexible approach depending on what research activities you do. So you would indicate, I'm doing X, Y, Z, and from that you would be given a standard set of actions at group level. Now there's organizational actions that are going to be in there as well. Those will not be against a certification for now. For now, it's more a framework of how organizations can support sustainable research activities, which I want to emphasize. I really think that highlights with, that aligns with the Concordat. So, a lot of questions we've had, and not specific necessarily to the UK, but organizations say, how do we address sustainable research at organizational level? And a lot of you are doing fantastic things. And then some have questions about where to start. So we thought by providing a framework and referencing examples and case studies of what people are doing can help advance and speed that process up for the organizations that aren't as far along as some of the others. So you come in and you can get some standard actions, and we're developing the content for this. This is actually for diagnostics, a specific area that was developed in alignment with Greener NHS, who had a fellow there that we supported, who's developed some of this content. It's actually being reviewed now by the Netherlands and a diagnostics group in France to try to internationalize it as well. You come in and then you can see how to, what the action is, very stepwise guidance on how to address it with references. And there will also be authorship. All of this will be publicly accessible. So if anybody contributes to it, they get recognized for this, which is, I think, really important. So, one of the questions for you is if anybody is doing anything good and you want to gain some recognition for it, you can submit this and get that recognition. There will also be a case study submission page. I really want to emphasize that because we did a long consultation in developing this, and what kept coming up is that people are doing a lot of fantastic things, but the ability to share them is a bit tricky sometimes, depending on what level and what activity they're doing. So one of the things we're building is a case study submission page where people can highlight in short form the good stuff they do, get some recognition for it, but also cascade it out and make it accessible to folks. There's a peer auditing mechanism in this, and I'm just going to jump to that, which is that we've heard that some organizations can manage audits internally, but at scale, there will be challenges to do this for the breadth of activities that we fund across UKRI. So we've put an externalized auditing mechanism where groups can audit outside of each other. It's not too dissimilar to what Green Disc uses. So Green Disc is the digital certification platform, and they're sort of externalized their audits, and that's essentially what we're doing. But we are going to provide a quality assurance step where the Spark CoP staff would check some of these randomly. And that's just to provide the specter of quality assurance, let's say. And one last thing I want to mention is that, okay, this is a fake certificate, but the groups that are certified for this would be publicly accessible. And any then funder could see what, who had participated and what they had been certified for. So that means that any funder or group could reference this in a single location, hopefully streamlining that process for organizations just now. And yes, I actually think the peer auditing mechanism is quite interesting as well, because it means that you can have experts assessing experts and sharing good practice with each other. So it's not just about the auditing and checking of things. It's about that sharing of knowledge and good practice, which I think is actually really important. So this is a list of some of the activities that we're covering. Quite a few specialist activities and in here, I'm not going to go through these all. There's a lot of good stuff going on out there, I gotta say. So it's not too hard to find good content. But I put in red as well the institutional guidance because I wanted to highlight that as separate. So this is all the types of activities that you could find for different groups. So sort of modular approach to groups. But then there's this institutional guidance, and EMBO hosted a workshop on this, and we've been looking at consulting. So we've written a basic framework on potentially how organizations could approach sustainability for sustainable research. And the idea was to consult on that with a few others. If anybody's interested, we can share out that framework. All of this stuff is open access. So if anybody wants to see or input on it, you're very welcome to. You just have to drop a line and you can ask any questions and you can see. But this is not a final list, so we think there's more areas that are going to come into this, but there's a lot of good content out there. So the top ones in black would be sort of modular, depending on what group activity they're doing, and then there would be institutional guidance for those that want it. And I'm going to mention a very specific example of institutional guidance around procurement. So one of the things we found is that we, at our institutions and organizations, and we do this internally within our own institutes at UKRI, is we've been writing specifications for engaging suppliers on sustainability. We wanted to share these specifications out, A, to reduce the resource required for people to write these things, and B, to standardize how we engage the sector, so the suppliers and manufacturers. And the point of that is to come in with an aligned approach and to equally reduce the resource required. Now, when you think about it, individual groups aren't always writing their specifications. That might happen at sort of a higher level, whether it's at faculty or organizational or institute approach. So by sharing out those specifications, we wanted to essentially align how that takes place. It's not mandatory that you use them, of course, but the idea is that it would be a helpful resource to address a gap there. And one of the things we're doing is working with NetDrive. I should take away the question mark there. NetDrive is a UKRI-funded program on sustainable digital research. And we are going to develop some specifications on the procurement of digital hardware and services, post them on the hub, and then anybody that wants to then procure that could then make use of it as well. So very tangible example of how we think we can help organizations that benefits everybody and also moves the sector in the right direction. I skipped by a little bit, but I did want to mention that we are going to host the content for Green Disc as well for digital activities on the hub. So we have a timeline for this. I'm going to skip ahead about this because this is a little bit more about engaging the other funders. It will be piloted soon. I guess I wanted to also mention that we've been developing a few calculators. One is around equipment, one is around consumables. And we also wanted to support the development of some existing calculators. So for example, Labo 1.5 is a group in France that have produced institute calculators, different. And Chloe, I'm going to mention that we did speak a little bit about this. It's different from the project-based calculator that you're going to hear from Exeter in a second. This is more if you wanted to assess the emissions of sort of an institute or group, less a project. But the idea was to internationalize those calculators to use UK emission factors. Also, not just UK, but for the sake of today, we're going to talk about UK. So we are trying to work with developing some existing resources, training, and et cetera, to support this, and it would all either be signposted or hosted on the hub. We're not going to host everything necessarily. Might be that we signpost, for example, what Exeter are doing around trace, because we don't need to host everything on there. The last thing I just want to mention is just an interesting point that we had during consultation, which is around environmental impact statements. And maybe I shouldn't get into this in too much depth, but some of the feedback we had is that to support sustainable research at group level, not everything is addressed through certifications, and sometimes there are some really unique forms of research that don't fit, no matter how tailored your certification is. And so we did think about engaging potentially other funders and coming up with sort of standard ways to consider engaging them on environmental impact statements. And it's not something we asked for. We have asked for it in some specific calls at UKRI. There's different councils that have done this, but it is not a UKRI policy. It is not across the board. And it isn't necessarily done in a standardized way between different funders around Europe. I'm just sharing this because it was a piece of consultation that came back, which was that getting people to think about how to integrate sustainability in really unique forms of research might be of benefit. So I'm going to try to stay on time. So I'll stop there. I've thrown a lot at you, but if anybody's interested, the case study submission portal and a landing page. By the way, the website is not live, I should highlight. I'm hoping that we'll have a landing page with a lot of information next week. You can contact me there, but we're going to launch a pilot later this year, and we're going to have a case study submission portal, and I've put that in bold because if anybody's doing any fantastic things, we'd encourage people to share their case studies so that people can start to highlight all the good stuff, and we can link that in and be able to share that out with the sector. 1 minute over, I'll stop there, but thank you very much, and let me know if you have any questions.
Great, thanks very much, Martin. If anyone has any quick questions for Martin now, I guess we could take a few just with an eye on the time. If not, we can come back to that after Chloe's presentation. So give you 30 seconds to put hands up. Okay, we've got one hand. We'll take John's question and then go on to Chloe's presentation just in the interest of time. Thank you.
Fine. One thing that's common for many of my colleagues in UK higher education is the people doing a lot of this activity, auditing and actually getting the facilities online are technical staff. This is more and more prominent rather than a research group PI lead. And some of the failings of other systems is that it doesn't recognize the fact that technical staff will function across multiple areas and also run core facilities. I'm just curious, has this been thought about in the underlying context of and construction of this sort of, you know, new system?
100%. It's a really good point. So that's in part why we wanted to have that modularity of the different activities that people do to reflect that you can have people working across different groups. So there's, you know, functionality to work across different groups, but different activities as well. And we were careful to not say, for example, that you can denote who takes part in this. The public name on it doesn't have to be, for example, an academic. It could be an academic, but it could be a technical staff to gain recognition for their input. So we have been engaging some of the technical networks on this, because in short, you're right. It often is a lot of technicians that do this, but equally, we did get a piece of feedback that we wanted there to also be a mechanism to encourage academics to support it as well, so that there's a bit of alignment there. I'm hoping that the aligned governance approach with multiple funders is a potential way to get that engagement.
Thanks for that. I know you're very familiar with LEAF, obviously, and you know that, like, sort of some of my colleagues, they have to be administrators at the university level because they're over so many laboratories and so many departments. They can't be part of that audit process individually. And I'm just hoping this isn't going to be the same situation, that it recognizes that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say last thing is that if anybody wants to consult on any bits of this or view the testing site or view the mechanisms, they'd be welcome to. So we ran a set of small workshops on this. So if any of your colleagues do want to feedback on that, just drop a line and we can set something up.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you both. There are a few questions in the chat, but just in the interest of time, we'll either come back to them, or if they can be replied to in the chat, that would be great. But now I'm going to hand over to Chloe from the University of Exeter to present about the TRACE project. Thank you, Chloe.
Thank you. And thanks, Martin, for teeing me up nicely. So let me just share my screen. Is that working? Brilliant, thank you. So TRACE, obviously we have to have a lovely acronym, took ages to come up with it, tracking research activity carbon emissions. And as Martin mentioned, this is really focused on project level impacts. It came out of all of the work that was happening around the Concordat and conversations that triggered internally for us around how an individual academic understands what the environmental impact of their project might look like, beyond, you know, oh, I'll cut down going to a conference the other side of the world. What more can they be thinking about, and how can we focus people's attention, particularly in spaces where there are kind of, you know, that they're thinking about this, but they're also thinking about value for money. They're thinking about EDI. That, you know, there are a whole range of things that people can't be experts in. So we need to give them as much information as possible. So the question then became, how were we going to do this? And we were really sat there with a number of our academics who were saying, I just don't know what this looks like unless I'm using a massive piece of kit or I'm flying all over the place. How do I understand what this looks like? So what we ended up looking at was developing an online platform that people could put in information that already existed. So when someone's developing a research project and they're doing their budget, that information can be put into this system, so you don't have to recalculate things, you don't have to go and find information, and that would give them the carbon footprint of their particular project. And Wellcome have given us a bit of money to take this to the kind of next stage, really, because we were doing the usual scraping together bits and pieces of people's time and working with our research software engineers. So we're now working on this kind of a bit more in earnest, and we've got a few partner universities, which is kind of expanding at the moment that we've been kind of consulting with to make sure that it's not too Exeter focused. It works for us at the moment, but you know, all universities have their own complex bureaucracy, so we just need to start to work out whether this can be something that a broader range of people can work on. And we have been working with some other institutions who have been kind of working on similar things. So Martin mentioned the team in France, there's a team in Switzerland that we've also been talking to kind of feed some of their things in, because we've kind of been doing complementary work, I suppose, to make sure that we're able to kind of share what's coming out of each of these. As I said, we are ever expanding and engaging with a huge range of people. And if there is anyone on this call who, you know, is either from one of these institutions but not aware, because obviously we're coming at this both from the research side and from the sustainability side. And I know, much like at our university, one side of the university often has absolutely no idea what the other side is doing. So please do give us a shout, regardless of whether you're on this or not, if you would like more information, or I'll talk in a minute about the pilot. It sounds like later this year is going to be Pilot Central. So if people are interested in being part of that as well, then please do give us a shout. So this year we've been really focusing on improving what we've got, verifying the data that we're using in the background. And if anyone does have questions about data, I will completely cop out and I think Tim is on the call, who is our data guru. Understanding internally what improvements we can make before we share it, and just doing some kind of technical work around some of the specifications to make some of it easier to use, essentially. The aim for us is to make it accessible, widely accessible, easy to use, easy to understand what comes out of the other end of it, and as low admin as possible, so that we encourage people to actually use it. This year now is really focusing on piloting it, sharing it with other organisations to see how broadly this can be applied, what changes we need to make to make sure that it's giving out the information that's needed. This year we've been starting to think about what the data looks like. So whilst at the moment it focuses on what an individual project might look like, we're starting to look at what the options look like for example, looking at a department, and being able to, for some of the internal management of organisations, to be able to look at what those groupings might look like, and allowing people to cross-check that information. We are starting to work on how this links in with other existing systems that people use to lower that bar even further for what people have to actually engage with in order to get these answers. Ideally, as few button presses as possible to just come out with a number at the end is what we're hoping for. And then the final section of the project will really be focusing on hopefully things like linking in with the work that you've been doing on Spark Hub to make sure that we're signposting people in the right direction for kind of further information. We've been linking in with some other projects that other institutions are doing, where they're really working on the kind of behaviour change aspects of things, so that we can make sure that when people come out with this number, they've got somewhere to go to find out what they might be able to do about things, or what that might mean in the broader context. We are starting to consider what this looks like in terms of research partnerships, because obviously a research project doesn't necessarily just involve HEIs in the UK. So we're reaching out to UK-based research institutes, for example, at the moment to try and understand what the tool might look like in that space. But we need to think about other partners in this space, both UK-based and internationally, and what us starting to use this tool might might mean for them, and how we can manage that longer term in the most appropriate way. So as I mentioned, we're now just gearing up to sort out the pilot to share with some of the institutions we've already got involved, and any other institutions. It's not too late if you are interested in being involved, and there are various ways you can. So I promise it's not, you don't have to sign your life away just to be involved in it. And we're really keen to get as much and as broader feedback as possible. This is just a idea of what the tool looks like at the moment. We've got screenshots here because I can never get technology to work. But if people are interested in actually looking at it in real life, then very happy to do another one of our kind of quick briefing sessions for people to give people an idea of what it really looks like. But you'll see that people can put these in as so that it's assessed based on value. The travel tool, for example, means that you can just put that in, because we know at the moment this is based on somebody developing a project at the beginning, and at the beginning of a project you don't necessarily know, I will be taking the train from this place to this place 12 times and then once somewhere else, and it's unusual to see people working things down in that level of detail. So we've kept the flexibility within the tool for people, for example, with travel, to be able to say, I've just put 10k aside for travel. Obviously that's a much cruder measure than if you can really break it down, but it's kind of trying to reflect the reality of what people are actually doing, and how people are actually working this, and make sure that people aren't prevented from using this by having to work through a whole load of detail that they might otherwise not be doing. The thing we've also started working on this year is how we can then take projects that are partway through or later, at the end, for example, and run the actual costs through this system to be able to say, actually, this is where we are so far. We've started to get the odd request here and there for some of that information from funders, and the data sits behind this to be able to do that. So that's kind of what we're doing at the moment. So when we're kind of sharing this, it is with a whole load of caveats that say, we don't expect people to be putting in the specific details of things. It might be an indicative number at the beginning. The more detail, the more specificity you put in, the better the number will be. But equally, you might not be doing this activity until 5 years down the line. So we have to accept that for people that like very specific and accurate data, they're going to have to be a little bit more relaxed about what this looks like for it to actually be something that's feasible and usable for people. And this is something that you might get out of the end of it at the moment. So this just breaks down what it looks like, and you get a more detailed breakdown that really gives you what each of those sections look like. You'll see that this version has got estates and indirect costs in it, and that's reflective of the fact that we're kind of trying to use what we would use for a full economic costing for a project. We're trying to manage this as a full carbon costing. However, for an individual PI, we will have the option to not have that in there, because they have more limited impacts over estates and indirects. Those are managed at an institutional level. So for the purposes of what they're doing, they would just have those sections that look at the pieces that they have a bit more control over. But we have the ability to have that whole information, so you can look at the whole impact of a project, not just what those project specific aspects look like. And that is obviously useful for some of the work we've been doing around institutional or organizational reporting and information that we might want to pull out of the other end of the tool. And the other part of the kind of results page that comes out of this will be to kind of point people in the direction of kind of case studies, best practice, places where they can get more information about how they might do things, because we're very conscious that knowing that something has got a big impact doesn't necessarily mean will miraculously know what the answer is. So again, if people have got things, and I think it sounds like the Spark Hub will be a really useful space for us to signpost to in this space, but any other platforms that might be useful for people, and people might be able to get a bit more information would be really great for us to be able to share in that space. And we are trying to present this for people in a kind of against a disciplinary backdrop, because we obviously recognise that some sorts of research will inherently have bigger impacts than others, and so we want people to have an idea of, relatively speaking, what that looks like. We're keen at the moment to make sure it's not looked at as a tool for kind of trying to hammer down what people are doing. At the moment, it's very much focused on the behaviour change aspect and giving people the information so that they can actually act on what that information looks like. So just mentioning again, I'm banging on about it, but yeah, the pilot will be kicking off very shortly. So if anyone is interested in getting involved or would like to know about how to get involved, please do get in touch. And it's the other thing is, if you know of any other activities that are happening that are similar to this or that you think might complement this, it's been really valuable when people have linked us up with some of these other ones. If someone's doing something, we absolutely don't want to reinvent the wheel or try and duplicate work that's already happening. So we're really keen to chuck everything we're doing in the community bucket to make sure that we can get something shared and useful for everyone out of the other end of it. So I think that's me. I probably rattled through that a little bit fast, sorry, but plenty of time for questions if anyone's got any questions.
Thank you so much, Chloe. And yes, we've got until 5 for questions. So first, I think that was got some questions in the chat, but also we've got Maggie, then Tony will take first, and then the chat questions if there aren't any more.
Hi, Chloe, and thank you very much for this presentation. So I'm new to the tool. I'm just discovering it as you're presenting it now. I think what strikes me when we're looking at the example you gave us when we had estates, indirect and so on, and I can fully understand the big picture aspect, but from your experience now, you've used that tool for 2 or 3 years. Indeed, it's trying to empower people to do something, isn't it? And we've had this talk recently, and when you see estate is taking so much of the impact and people have no control over it, I mean, how did you manage to then have you tried to do you have some case studies basically that show how much impact you can actually have or expect to do once you know what your impact is to start with? Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, absolutely it does. Yeah, and it's a really good question. We don't at the moment. It's something that we're hoping to get out of the pilot to be able to do it in a kind of slightly more managed way, I suppose. So it's one of the reasons why we'll have kind of 2 options of whether things are. So we've had exactly that feedback from our academics that, well, partly there's the why am I bothering to do anything because this dwarfs anything that I'm doing, so it's a waste of time, or how do I impact this? There doesn't feel like I can really have any impact over this, which is why we will be eventually kind of having that 2-tiered model where it shows the direct project impacts versus the kind of overarching thing, kind of in recognition that for some things that's really useful, and institutionally that was something that we were keen to have. But in terms of encouraging that behaviour change and allowing people to focus on what they can do, that's not kind of necessarily constructive information always for people to be accessing. But yeah, so we don't have that at the moment, but it's something that I'm hoping we will have in the next kind of few months to be able to give an idea of, in practice, what this has actually resulted in.
Thank you.
I think Tony was next.
Hi, thanks, Susie. It's a question really to Martin and to Chloe. Thanks both for presentations. I'm a trial manager at an NHS organisation, and I also co-chair the Research Development Forum's Sustainability Working Group. So it's a question from the perspective of a local site looking to make sustainable improvements within the NHS, but also the kind of wider NHS landscape. So for both Spark CoP and for Trace, I wanted to know, I've looked at and seen the kind of presentations for pilots on a lot of things which seem to have either higher education or commercial kind of bent towards how they operate, and often they don't fit or mold to the nuances of NHS research delivery in terms of modelling for multiple sites or being able to manipulate the data if you're doing something that's different to the way that data is calculated. An example of that, just a quick example of that, is where a project I'm working on is looking at a new protocol MRI, which when you plug in your number of MRI scans, it's using standard protocol MRI data, and we need to be able to manipulate that for a shorter length of time, that type of thing. So I just wanted to ask how both Spark CoP and Trace are able to be supporting the NHS landscape, really, or whether they do support the NHS landscape.
So I'll take that first if that's useful. I would say kind of two aspects, I suppose. In part, some of the driver of the way that we've built the Trace tool gives a certain amount of flexibility to be able to input some of that specific information, because we recognise that some things are standard, but some things absolutely aren't. So we've tried to build that flexibility in. We haven't yet specifically done anything with the NHS, but I have this week, and I'm very glad I did it now because I can say it. Have been speaking to the new head of our joint research office to consider how we might be using something like this when we're working on projects with our specific NHS partners. So it is something we're going to start to look at as part of the work that I said we were doing on working with partners, because for us they're one of our biggest partners. So at the moment it's not kind of it isn't designed in a specific way to work, for example, in the NHS, but it is something we're going to start to look at and understand what changes we might need to make it work in that space, if it's possible, or so but equally, any if anyone's interested in kind of being involved or just having a look and saying, these are the things that definitely wouldn't work for us, it'd be really welcome, because we're really keen to make sure that we are capturing that space and the clinical trials aspect of things very much so. And I noticed in the chat there was another comment about clinical trials and toolkit development. So I'm really keen to bring that together and make sure we're able to absorb that into what we're doing.
Amazing, thanks. Yeah, I'll message you right now. I'll send you an email, because I'm only just up the motorway.
Fabulous, brilliant. Great. Thank you.
I'll quickly answer, but then I have a question I have to admit for Chloe. But I'll say that some areas within the NHS we have started to include, in particular where there's sort of a crossover between research and clinical, and we have been engaging other clinically focused funders about the governance of this. So the area that I mentioned was diagnostics and potentially clinical trial units. So looking at providing sustainability guidance for them in those spaces. We haven't gone out widely to other spaces. I mean, different clinical specialties have different sources of guidance, some of which exist, some of which doesn't yet. If anybody's aware, radiotherapy just came out with a new free certification from the Royal College, for example. Emergency medicine has one run through the Royal the RChem. So some of which applies to NHS, and we have been engaging with Greener NHS about this, potentially using it elsewhere. But for now, those are the areas that we focused on for where there's this really clear crossover.
And just to follow up on that, Martin, any plans for Greener NHS to incorporate their case studies into Spark Hub?
When the areas where they think it's applicable and they want to use it, they'd be welcome to. So for example, diagnostics, I think there's a really strong link. And so there's been a gap. And actually the fellow that we had that was addressing that was supported by the head of pathology from the NHS, who, you know, we had really great support for that role. So I think there are where there's that alignment, but maybe Greener NHS wants to take it. It's an open discussion, put it that way. So
perfect. Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks both.
Quickly, I just wanted to ask Chloe about the sort of a similar question, less about NHS, but the international angle on it. So one of the thoughts that we've had is whether calculators or projects can be assessed that are taking place in other countries, and also the thought about projects that take place across multiple countries. And it's just a challenge we've had with some of the carbon assessments of some of the projects that we fund across UKI that take place, and just how have you approached some of those international considerations?
So at the moment, we're kind of working separately, I suppose, with those two aspects. So we're piloting the tool with just the UK-based data in the background of it at the moment. And whilst that's happening, starting to look at what we can do in that international space so that we can reflect what we've got there. One of the things we're really keen to ensure is that we're not, we don't kind of inadvertently end up outsourcing our impacts somehow, or end up unfairly, not unfairly, kind of misrepresenting what this looks like on the basis of somebody working in a country or with a partner where the infrastructure doesn't kind of allow for them to do certain activities. So it's a really complex picture. Luckily for us, I suppose, one of our key academic leads in this space also works on kind of equitable partnerships and international working. And so we're engaging in that space to really understand what some of this, what some of the impacts of this might look like. So at the moment, we haven't kind of absorbed that bit, but that's something that we will be looking at kind of over the course of the next year, to make sure that we're able to really reflect that space, that aspect within there. And we'll be partly informed by how we're able to absorb kind of non-HEIs at the moment. And so as we start to expand the sorts of partners we're working with, then we'll be able to include those parts in there, is the hope.
Thanks, Chloe. Thanks, Martin, and thanks, Tony. Can I just hand over to Paula now, because we've got a question, and there are some in the chat as well.
Thanks very much. It's a brilliant meeting. Thank you. This is sort of a question for Chloe and Martin, actually. So my colleague from Greener Trials, actually, there's Lisa, and she's put some information about Greener Trials in the chat. But I think one of the things that's coming out is, you know, some research designs have some very specific aspects to it. And one of the common features, I think, of all the calculator tools, let's say, is the issue about emission factors. So, Martin, you raised a question, you know, about international. I mean, there are lots of multinational clinical trials. We're facing the same sorts of issues in sourcing publicly available emission factors. So, Chloe, we wondered whether you were using publicly available emission factors or whether you've gone for a license set. And Martin, again, the same question for UKRI, but Spark Hub and other funders. Is there any recommendations? Because you can, of course, pay for a license, but, you know, if you want the latest from a particular company, but that is expensive and won't be transparent when you come to reporting. The question that's linked to it, many of the people using our tool for clinical trials. They're trying to publish their work, and one of the questions that comes back from journals is around the accuracy and can you do some sensitivity analysis and that sort of thing. And I just think this is going to come up more and more. So sorry, long-winded way of saying, are you using publicly available emission factors, and can we all work together if we're doing that to share, because that would be quicker.
It is a conversation that we have absolutely had, and I'm hoping that Tim is still on the call. It's excellent. Thanks. So Tim is our sustainability data person who has been looking into which data we're using, why and how. So I will let him give you a more coherent answer.
So for the conversion factors, we are largely using publicly available ones, which are sourced from, well, at the moment it's UK based, so it's all from the gov.uk website. There are other sources, there's the European ones and there's other ones we could use, which if we, when we do look at the kind of outside of the UK factors, which, and again, we'd aim to do the publicly available ones, so there's no issues with licenses. There is a handful of custom factors, I'm going to call, which the university will need to calculate, which is effectively an average of different elements depending on the proportion of different activities at their university. So, for instance, there's one looking at the estates. So it's looking at the total spend on the estates versus the total carbon of the estates. So we figure out a factor using that. So that there's a few custom ones like that. Does that answer your question? We good?
Yes. Jess Griffiths, who I think is on the call, is using a variety of different sources, obviously government ones when available. There are just challenges with multinational clinical trials, for example, in particular. So connecting up as much as possible, I think, would be great.
And I think that would be a hugely useful activity. I think in the terms of where we are in the project, we're not at that stage yet for worrying about the international factors. The framework, the structure behind in the back end can totally do it. We just haven't gone to the step of putting them in yet.
And that's the approach we're taking too, Tim. So the system is built so that you can go to a country-specific emission factor for something if you have it, if it's there. But if it's not, you default to the UK ones, which we've generally managed to, or Jess has managed to source. So I think it's something about development over time, isn't it? And linking up. Sorry, thanks.
Thank you.
I mean, I'll quickly say that we've been referencing typically the open source ones are, the energy ones, and it's the embodied carbon ones that require a license often, and from some of the databases. I think the one gray zone which we're trying to get a strict answer to is what happens if somebody puts in a publication a behind license carbon factor, and what is the then status of that for being able to be utilized, which I don't have an answer to, but it's something that we were trying to get an answer to, because academics do often pay for licenses and then use those carbon factors in their assessment, in which it goes to open source journals. And then and I don't have an answer for that, but we wanted to get one because it would help clarify what we can and can't use.
Can I ask, sorry, to add supplementary code, Martin, has there been any discussion amongst the Heidelberg people who are involved in that agreement about should we do some sort of deal around a publicly available, up-to-date source license, or is it just not going to happen? I mean, so that we're all using the same underlying set of emission factors that are not subject to a license.
Specifically about emission factors I don't think it's no, not yet. I don't think. I think there has been. I think there's somebody on the call here who I don't want to put on the spot, who's looking at this within physics, but in short, I'll say the safe answer for now, no. In part because I think, to be honest, a lot of the reporting requirements focus on scopes 1 and 2, and most of those carbon factors at organizational level are publicly available. So, the impetus around if scope 3 requirements were to become more required, then you could make an argument that actually you need more publicly available. But at least right now, it's I'd say for those licenses, no, there not that I know of, but there might be elsewhere. It is a good point.
Great, thanks everyone. Do we have any final pressing questions for any of our speakers? I know there's been a lot of really great discussion in the chat, and I'm sure that in the recap of this, alongside presentations, slides and recordings that will be shared afterwards. And yeah, lastly, a really big thank you to our speakers, and I'll now hand back to Jenny to close.
Hi everyone, thank you. Just want to say, yes, a huge thank you to our speakers again, Chloe and Martin, and also Susie for chairing the chair. Thank you all for attending. Like Susie said, the presentations and the recording will be shared with everyone once they're made available. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.